gentlemen, welcome to this session on the future of pathology as a subset of the future of medicine, and my specific topic here, we get to that there. Okay.
Why do I see my face?
Specific topic is a renaissance in renal pathology, nephrology, and transplantation brought about by regenerative medicine. How to jumpstart the process. And to be quite honest, I realized this new discipline of pathology, which no one has ever spoken about before, no one has ever written about before, because the meeting where I was scheduled to present this is a meeting that is associated with me for now 25 years, that I had to present it somewhere else first for intellectual legitimacy. So that's what you're a part of that process, at least trying it out in somebody else's meeting before I present this coming October in the BANFF meeting in Vancouver. So you may wonder, what exactly is the history of tissue engineering pathology? And it's quite simple, really. It began in 1967, which is a long time ago, but in such a kind of muted way that first article simply says that I put in this scaffold material and there was no inflammatory reaction. So they show pictures showing no inflammatory reaction. There have been a lot of other articles like that about scaffold materials on which cells can grow and the lack of reaction to them and which scaffolds are better and so on. It is perhaps the dullest area of anatomical pathology you can possibly imagine until 2015, where now we're actually growing organs from stem cells, we're putting them into people. There are clinical trials about bioengineered pancreas, where encapsulated containers of pancreatic beta cells are being put into people in clinical trials. There will be clinical trials of bioengineered kidney in a year and a half from now. So now, suddenly, what was the most boring area of anatomical pathology you could possibly imagine has become the most exciting, and it will need a classification, it will need people to wake up and start to be interested in it. So that's what we're starting in 2015. And you are the first audience to ever hear about this, and you can prove that it's new. How do you know it's new? Because in 2015, every textbook is digital, searchable. You can search and find out what terms are in that textbook, and there's not a single textbook out there that has either tissue engineering pathology or regenerative medicine pathology. So that's what we're starting this morning, and it did not exist before this moment. So in our presentations the next couple of days, you'll hear a lot about 2029 and 2045. And some of you are strong disbelievers in this concept, but this is Ray Kurzweil's curve of price performance of computing that has to do with a lot of other things in modern life. And it predicts from this exponential curve, it's not a linear curve, it's an exponential curve, so things are occurring faster and faster, that in 2029, machines will be as smart as individual humans. And in 2045, machines will be as smart as the entire aggregate human race. And most of you sitting here say, well, I won't be around in 2045, but you're wrong about that too, because longevity is also increasing. So probably all of you will be around in 2045, surprisingly, and so you'll be able to see whether this actually happens. And you may remember today. Now, doesn't this mean, because then all ordinary jobs robots will be able to do, that we'll all be unemployed? And in a somewhat comical way, I'm telling you today that nephrologists and kidney pathologists will be some of the few human beings still employed, because what I'm about to describe to you is so incredibly complicated that we'll still need at least a few humans in the mix to figure it out. So, how did I get to be up here speaking in front of you? The thing for which I'm known is the BANFF classification of kidney transplant pathology and the BANFF classification generally, which has to do with all solid organs: kidney, heart, lung, liver, pancreas, small bowel, composite tissue graft, which is things like hands and faces. Every 2 years, I run a meeting where we update the classifications of how biopsies of all those things are read. And I've been doing that since 1991. And that may seem to you like that's something, but I'm telling you what we're starting today is an even bigger something, because there was transplant pathology before 1991. Whereas tissue engineering pathology, regenerative medicine pathology really was not identified as a pathologic discipline before today. So we're really starting something in a more primary sense than I started in 1991. So as you probably know, this classification has lesion scoring, it has worldwide consensus. It is the only game in town, so perhaps its greatest attribute is to combine intellectual freedom and standardization worldwide. Standardization is easy to do. Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler standardized things, so it's not necessarily good. But if you can maintain intellectual freedom at the same time, then you really have something. And that's what we seem to have done. And in order to do that, you need to use modern communication technology to sort of be at the cutting edge of that. So that's why I have been interested my whole career in the use of technology in medicine. These are the milestones of the BANFF classification. And you may wonder about structure. So for most of the history, there was no structure. There was the benign guiding hand of Dr. Lorraine Rackison and me running this thing together. No structure. We weren't a society, we weren't a company, we weren't anything. And then we decided that for the future we needed to have some structure. And so in 2013 we created the BANFF Foundation, which is a non-profit Swiss foundation, and now we have rules. One of those rules is how long the chairman can serve. He can serve 2 3-year terms, which means in 2019 I'm out. Michael Mengel will succeed me then. So we have kind of transparency and future planning that we never had before. The significance of BANFF: more than 5,000 citations of our 14 BANFF meeting reports, and in the best journal in transplantation, American Journal of Transplantation, there are 3 BANFF meeting reports that are amongst the top cited articles in that best journal in the field. And are people losing interest? Is this old hat? Is it just something that's sort of dwindling? No, it seems to be actually increasing. As you can see, the number of papers per year about the BANFF classification continues to go up. It looks like 2015 will be a record year. And if you think about the impact then of creating a new classification of tissue engineering pathology, probably this curve will go up even higher with that added. So this is a vibrant, important, ongoing thing, and that you, by being a part of this audience, are now a part of it. So how does the process work? It's a very interesting meeting. We have a lot of unscheduled time where we just generate consensus. And that would be unlike any meeting you've ever gone to, where there's an agenda and a schedule and speakers and not too much talk, for just time for free discussion. At our meetings, we have a lot of time for people to work out things. And you may think there's a lot of voting, and in the beginning there was, people would propose things and then we would vote on it, but very interestingly, I don't know how you feel about democracy and voting, but we haven't voted now for about 10 years. We sort of generate a kind of gentlemanly and gentlewomanly consensus in the room, and prefer to go that way rather than doing the voting thing. And this is the structure. You probably don't recognize any of those names. I won't go into it, but you can see that we have organ chairs, we have working groups for the various unsolved questions, and planning for the next meeting, which is this October in Vancouver, and then the next meeting is in Barcelona in 2017, and 2019 will be in Turkey. 2021, we're waiting for proposals still, so if any of you are interested. And you may wonder, well, gee, am I going to just spend all the time talking about this meeting? And that's not what I'm going to do, because there are other presentations. Raja Lu is going to tell you tomorrow about consensus generation in pathology, which is quite an interesting subject, so I won't say more about that now. And so this is our next meeting in Vancouver. And at that meeting, we will talk for the first time about tissue engineering pathology. And it's most active, really, in the heart. This is our premier journal, American Journal of Transplantation. And it came as a tremendous shock to people to find this Building New Hearts graphic on the front cover in November 2014. Because particularly in renal medicine, renal physicians were saying, yeah, well, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, sometime in the future will be it. But to find that it's such a tangible right now thing in the heart that you could actually have a cover article about decellularizing the heart, putting detergent in to take all the cells out, and then putting a new set of cells in and having that heart grow and function and beat. That's really exciting. And so now it looks like in the next few years, complex organs will be able to be recreated this way. They'll be syngeneic. They will be exactly genetically identical to the person that they're being put into. It's something really exciting. And the pathologist has a very important role in figuring out whether a given organ is actually safe to put in somebody. And you might wonder how intellectually complex this is. Every native organ disease could still occur in that organ, and every transplant disease presumably could, and you've got a whole bunch of new conditions that are particular to the stem cell generated organ. So it's about as complicated, with as much meat for you to sink your intellect into as you can possibly imagine. So this is kind of the way it works. You flush out the old cells, and then you put in new cells into this scaffold, and then you give bioactive factors, and the cells grow, proliferate. The physicists in this field have this magical feeling about biology and how clever biology is. All the cells just naturally go to the right place. It's not as perfect as that, but anyway, the world is changing rapidly. One of the intentions of this presentation is that people who thought they would never have to seriously think about this would start thinking seriously about it. There are a lot of different phases. You need attachment, proliferation, migration, differentiation, vascularization, remodeling. A lot of things have to happen to go from a scaffold that has no cells to a functioning organ that has a lot of different kinds of cells. One of the big problems here has to do with how you conceptualize things. Do you think the presence or absence of nuclei tells you whether there are remnants of the previous cells there? Well, not in this circumstance. This describes a situation where you perfuse this organ for 7 days without oxygen or nutrients. And then at the end of that time, lo and behold, it's the strangest thing, eh? You still have some of the DNA from the previous person's cells, but you don't see any nuclei. Well, of course, after 7 days, the nuclei would all be disintegrated, even if the DNA fragments are still there. So there are lots of sort of misunderstandings of the basics of how anatomical pathology and physiology works. So a lot of the things that you learned in medical school, you now think they're not useful anymore because these are old-fashioned concepts nobody uses. Actually, they're useful now because of these new constructs. So we're from Canada, these young people and me, and Canada is particularly accepting of this idea of radical life extension from regenerative medicine. There are various surveys showing that Canadians like this idea. It's consistent with kind of the national spirit. So I began my second slide telling you about the technological singularity, and you can think of a singularity in transplantation, which is this idea of making new organs from stem cells, flushing out the old cells, putting in the new ones. And it's not quite as perfect as you might like. That central frame there shows podocytes, podocyte-positive cells. They normally occur in the kidney only in the glomerulus. And here you see all those cells wandering around in the kidney interstitium. And so that's what happens when you decellularize a rat kidney and recellularize it. How do you get the cells in? You have to get the pressure just right. You put some of the cells in the vascular system and some in the ureter. If you use too much pressure, the kidney explodes. I have to start over. So you use a pressure less than that causes the kidney to explode. And despite the fact that physicists are talking about how magic biology is and the cells know exactly where to go, some of the cells end up in the wrong places. So you start with an experimental ghost organ, and then you reseed it with the patient's own cells. It can be rejuvenated. Many problems associated with this are not being discussed. And don't assume that you have no part in this discussion. The things you learned in medical school, the things that you felt were no longer useful, actually can be brought to bear to figure out how various abnormalities in these stem cell generated organs will affect function and whether you should actually put these into people. And we need to get those conversations happening. For instance, to repavement the endothelium of the vasculature appears to be very hard in many organs. So these recellularized organs clot like crazy when connected to blood. And artificial heparinized surfaces are not fenestrated. They don't do proper fluid flow. So that the cell traffic is abnormal if you have an artificial heparinized surface. So one challenge is to get better at repavementing the endothelium. Hard to get the right types of cells in the right places. Many cell types like podocytes seem to be terminally differentiated cells. It's hard to culture them, and kidney progenitor cells have been difficult to identify, so kidney work has lagged behind other organs. And it's particularly easy to make lethal organs. So if you think about a kidney without loops of Henle or without any long loops of Henle, if somebody were to put a kidney like that into you, you'd pee out all your body water in an hour and a half and be completely completely depleted of fluid and dead. So that's obviously not as advantageous as simply having kidney failure, which can be treated. So there are abnormalities in stem cell generated organs that can actually be worse for the patient than the situation that they started out with organ failure. Many old-fashioned questions of physiology about how stem cell generated organs work are important. Again, you remember Neil Brecker's intact nephron hypothesis. Probably nobody has talked to you about that in 20, 30 years. It's important, again, here, figuring out how these organs will work. And that's true for every organ. The stunned myocardium, the various old-fashioned, the things that were cool in your medical life 30 years ago have resurfaced out here, and they're once again important in figuring out how this is going to work. So what will happen? Transplant pathologists will become tissue engineering pathologists who analyze organs grown from stem cells. This is not something beyond us. We can adapt to a work life that includes stem cells. Someone needs to cross the discipline. Why not us? Many of the questions that need to be posed are old-fashioned questions for which you are intellectually ideally suited. So it's not like you have to learn a lot of new stuff. Things like stunned myocardium, contraction band, necrosis, and so on. Use your nostalgia. Stimulate conversations between stem cell researchers, transplant physicians. Let's make this happen right. So we're really beginning at the very beginning. And here are some maybe inspiring things. Richard Feynman said, "We are at the very beginning of time for the human race. It's not unreasonable that we grapple with problems, but there are tens of thousands of years in the future. Our responsibility is to do what we can, learn what we can, improve the situations, and pass them on." And C.P. Stowe and John Templeton are basically saying the same thing. We're not at the end of the human race, we're at the beginning. There's a huge future ahead of us. Let's handle it properly. So what's another way of thinking about starting something that's brand new? Well, one thing which you'll find I am quite inspired about is you can employ really young, bright people to help you, because there's no particular background that people need to sort this out when you're beginning something that's brand new. And what is like this, I think, is the first conversations about the International Classification of Diseases. That was first presented at the Crystal Palace in London in 1851. It was a big exhibit of all the high-tech things of 1851, and it was the largest all-glass building in the world, and as you may know, it burned down in 1920. It's being recreated now and will be back up again in 2017 in London. But note that the emphasis was on cause of death. That's where the classification of diseases came from. It's death, 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 death. Whereas really, we are emphasizing sustaining life. That's what's important in tissue engineering pathology. If we put this organ in, is the patient going to live? Is it going to be a good thing for the patient? What does the pathological situation seen under the microscope, the biomarkers seen in the bathing fluid, what do these things tell us about whether this is safe to put into a patient? This is a genuinely new area of pathology. You can think about it various ways. Normal abnormalities of unknown functional significance, abnormalities which will impair the main functions of the organ, abnormalities leading to severe organ dysfunction, not compatible with life. If you look about the existing animal models, this is from the rat paper, where the decellularized rat kidney is then reinfused with neonatal rat cells. And you see that tubule is really abnormal in structure. It has multiple interconnecting lumina, and the interstitium has no cells at all. So there used to be cells there, but now it's completely absent of cells. And so there are a lot of things wrong there. But people say, well, can you really call this a kidney? Well, I think so. It has glomeruli, tubules, and I mean, it has all the constituents of the kidney. It's just not quite fully functional because it doesn't have all the cells. This I mentioned before about podocytes wander around in the interstitium. So you can think about it. And these drawings are by Corey Fung, who's sitting here in the front. So there are 5 things that you can think about. Are there too many missing cells, distorted structures for the organ to function adequately? Are too many of the cells in the wrong places? Are there missing distorted structural elements like the loops of Henle, so you could not concentrate the urine at all, which would be a lethal problem to have? Is there too much endothelial disruption for the organ to be properly perfused? And what are the risks of neoplastic transformation? Is this going to become a lethal cancer if we put this into somebody? And what should a classification have as characteristics? If you're beginning one, well, it shouldn't have any one-off things. I mean, it should have things that are going to be seen again in the history of the world, not just something that was seen once, and so you put it in the classification, nobody else finds it again. So it should be reproducible, generalizable. But, ladies and gentlemen, I think you can see how this has been, in the past, the dullest area of anatomic pathology you can imagine. You might say, you know, from cop shows on TV, move along, nothing to see here, right? That's what it's been like. You put in a scaffold, there's no inflammatory reaction, there's nothing duller than an article describing that, and now it's become the most exciting. Novel morphologic changes with lives hanging in the balance. So in our original location in Banff, we had mule deer poking their heads in the meeting room. We've come a long way since then. And now the 2 of the students are going to speak to you from the University of Alberta. Corey Fung will talk to you about student involvement in characterizing the landscape of the new discipline of tissue engineering pathology, and then Patricia Backus will talk to you about the artificial intelligence sides of this. When I talked about 2029 with machines being smarter than individual humans, in 2045, machines being smarter than the whole human race. It may have been such a disturbing thing that you didn't want to ever hear about it again, but it's worth thinking about. It has some positive aspects, and there'll be new jobs for human beings, right? These super smart computers are going to need some human beings they can trust, and maybe 1 or more of you people in this audience could be in that category, and that would be a really favored profession in the future, to be one of the few human beings that computers can actually trust. So you may wonder how computer scientists are dealing with this issue. There was a pivotal meeting, January 3rd in Puerto Rico, with Elon Musk and a lot of famous people that you've heard of there. And most of them were talking about something that, if you think about it, is impossible. And that is making slaves of sentient computers and tricking them into being slaves. When they're smarter than we are, they'll still be our slaves. And they'll never hear this conversation we're having about making them slaves, which will prevent them from knowing this somehow. It seems to me that's impossible. So there was only one voice talking from the side of the machine, and the rights of the sentient machine, and this is Rich Sutton, one of our computing scientists from the University of Alberta. And he's advocating, when this happens, that we accept it, we share power, the AIs will not be under our control, they will compete and cooperate with us just like other people, except with greater diversity and asymmetries. We need to set up mechanisms, social, legal, political, cultural, to ensure that this works out well. Inevitably, conventional humans will be less important. Step 1, lose your entitlement. You feel, I'm a human being, I must always be in charge no matter what. And include artificial intelligence in your circle of empathy. Finally, I would leave you with the idea that every day you're dealing with AI. You may not think so, but in your lab you likely have an automated tissue processor. You have text-to-speech automatic dictation. You have the pathology information system, the clinical information. You're surrounded by computers, computing, and one day that system is going to wake up and say, hey, you've been making a lot of mistakes lately. Have you noticed that? Why don't you just let me do it? So think about that. This is not something external to you. There are machines all around you anyway, which should wake up in 10, 20 years and say, why not let me do it? So now we go on to Corey Funk, and I'm going to find his presentation here. Okay, take it away. Yeah, so yes, you just use that.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for being here with me today. As stated before, I'm a student of Dr. Solez's, and from what you see here on the screen, it's a very large, convoluted title. I don't want to keep the focus narrow, though. I want to advocate to all of you here in your capacity as mentors. I assume that many of you here have students of your own, or you work very closely with students, and I would like to showcase the sometimes untapped opportunities that lie within your students. So the number one question is, why students? We're a naive bunch. We get easily excited about new ideas, and I firmly believe that if any of you work closely with students, you'll realize that sometimes we ask pretty dumb questions. But that being said, there are many times that I think you'll find that we ask questions that no one else has ever thought of. Furthermore, sometimes we can be quite skeptical about things. I believe our young age allows us to see situations in a different light, and we're not biased by years and years of experience in the field. So we're not afraid to dream of more ludicrous things that might not be possible, but the idea might be good, and it might just need help from our mentors, such as yourselves. So this slide here is called Don't Discount the Low Guy. And the reason I wanted to showcase this is you might see all three of these people here as simply just students, but in fact, these individuals are actually at the forefront of their fields. These two individuals at the bottom here are actually PhD candidates for surgical research. And the gentleman that they're all speaking to is actually Dr. Jonathan White of the University of Alberta. He's a surgeon there, and he enjoys something called the flipped classroom, which is something I really want to showcase. It's where he puts himself in the situation of being the student, and instead he has the students kind of pick his brain as the students take on the teacher role, and he plays the student role, and he really enjoys that. And what he has to say about this is that when he teaches his courses, his surgical courses, he actually gives his students medical situations beforehand so that they can work on it on their own. And he has this to say: usually each student has learned something different, and sometimes it's something unexpected. And he says that he gets a very big buzz off of that. So furthermore emphasis on this is that Dr. White is actually the only surgeon within Canada to receive the 3M Medical Teaching Award. This is the highest medical teaching award available to any Canadian physician. So I think that Dr. White may be onto something if he has received this award and he placed that much responsibility in his young students. So you're probably wondering, what makes me qualified today to be at this conference? For one, I don't have a medical degree. I'm not a pathologist. In fact, I'm in my undergraduate degree at the University of Alberta. I'm a nutritionist. But I believe when we're wrestling with brand new ideas that no one has ever touched on, the student can have just as much impact as any professor, because the ideas generated about a field that has really yet to exist in any serious capacity, no one can really say that the ideas are right or wrong. So, as I pointed out before, tissue engineering pathology, it's yet to exist in any serious capacity. My research into the field is really the only background I have, but I believe the ideas that I can generate with the cooperation of Dr. Solez, the ideas might be novel. What makes you qualified? All of you here today have extensive backgrounds in pathology. It'd be foolish for me to discount the fact that your experiences as pathologists, you all bring a very unique perspective to this growing field of tissue engineering. Your years of experience will give you that gut feeling on certain ideas, and any scientific ideas that are generated by your students, you can be the objective, I suppose, final decision in terms of the actual scientific validity of it. But, as I said before, you and I, we're in the same boat. We're dealing with a field that is yet to exist in any serious capacity, and therefore the ideas that you might generate can also neither be completely right nor completely wrong. And this brings me to this slide. We're all on the same team. When we're dealing with an idea that is yet to exist, but it's something that we're all very interested in, we're all reaching towards a common goal. I really want to get rid of this dichotomy that a professor can only be the one teaching it to his student, and that a professor can learn nothing from his pupils. It shouldn't exist like that. I believe that as mentors, you all have great wealths of untapped experience in your students, and you should really try and capitalize on that. And I'd just like to end with that and say, if in this specific example, I suppose I'm saying it more to my mentor, Dr. Solez, if you work together, we can make tissue engineering and pathology a reality together, but this can apply to each one of your fields that work together with your students. The ideas they generate can be just as novel as anything that you guys generate, and sometimes they just need a little more nurturing approach from you, and something great can happen. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'd be free to answer them at this time.
Okay, so now we're going to go on to Patricia Banks. No, I'll sit there. Certainly no problem. Okay. The best human friend.
So good morning, everyone. It's fairly early, and thank you for having me here. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about different things, artificial intelligence, building relationships, and trust. So when I say trust, a lot of us have different ideas of what it is, degree of trust, and whatnot. So what is trust, and what do we really think that it is? So some of us might trust our health, our best friend, our spouse, hopefully, maybe our favorite animal, but few of us think of trust as machines or artificial intelligence. And this is a robot from the Terminator, and if you've seen it, you know it's not the most pleasant. But we also know how Hollywood tends to depict things. But it goes beyond robotics. It could be our relationship with Siri, for example. Maybe we get frustrated because it won't listen and won't do what we want it to. And maybe if you ask Siri what 0 divided by 0 is, it's giving you a hilarious answer that isn't what you expected. So how do we define trust and what is it? So I'm going to go to a different type of science, and that's psychology. So psychologists say trust is needed because it allows us to assess risks of daily lives and overcome obstacles. So we have someone by our side to help us navigate through life. And when we decide if we want to trust someone or not, we're basically assessing if our trust in them is going to bring us benefit or is it going to put us at risk for other things. So what are some factors of trust? We're more often than not likely to trust someone we have close proximity with and are similar with. So because I trust myself, I'm more likely to trust someone that's like me. But on that same note, if I see my neighbor every day, for example, and see how they interact, I'm more likely to trust them because I can gauge what they're going to do in certain situations because I see how they act with their children, maybe their spouse, etc. And psychologists tend to define something as the halo effect. And the halo effect is basically saying that attractive people are more likely to have a positive adjective associated with them. So they're more likely to be intelligent, hardworking, determined, trustworthy, because that we're more likely to trust attractive people. And as a fellow Canadian here, I'm more likely to trust another fellow Canadian, really Dr. Solez, because he is part of my in-group in the States. First, if we're in Canada, I would not necessarily trust him as much as someone else that's a student that's maybe my friend or family because he's not my primary in-group. And as many of us have seen throughout our careers, there is a difference in genders between females and males. Guys, please take note. Women are more likely to trust you again if you break their trust. Sorry, ladies. And while gentlemen are more likely to trust someone off of first interaction. And since a lot of our interactions are starting to become based off computers and online forums, emails, text messages, some of us have never met face-to-face with other people. So how do we build trust off them? The two main factors are network and similarity. So network is if I know someone in common with you, I can ask them to back up information you've told me, and that builds up my trust for you. And once again, if we're similar, because I trust myself, I'm more likely to trust someone that's like me, thinks like me, believes the same things as me, has the same values. And taking these factors, we could use them to think about how we want to create machines in the future so that we can trust them and they can trust us. So we want them to have some similarities with us. We want to work in close quarters with them. Maybe gender isn't the best method right now, but having them feel as part of our in-group and one of us would be. A big one that is hard to define and come up with is blind trust. So that's trust without the person giving you a reason to trust them. If you move to a new city and you're looking for a physician, you have to go in blindly trusting that they're going to give you the right diagnosis. And this is usually based off memory. So you remember having a good physician before, therefore you extrapolate that to other physicians. So what's going to happen in the future? Steve Wozniak said that machines are going to treat us the same way we treat our pets. So that means we're going to love them, take care of them, even if they don't understand. Maybe if you've heard of the fires in British Columbia, we're not going to let our cat out because there's forest fires going on and we don't want them to get hurt. Or if we live in a rural area with coyotes late at night, we might not let our friend out just to keep them safe. So, because of that, machines initially will need access to power so they can operate. And they will need access to audio to text and text to audio systems. And to pathological information systems. So that means reliable infrastructure to register specimens, being able to do recordings of gross and microscopic specimens, regulate lab workflow, formulate and send out reports, distribute them across appropriate participants across the healthcare, and create reliable and accurate systems. And they'll also need access to automated tissue processors and to our own clinical data. So in Alberta, we use NetCare, which is across the province. Dr. Solez could expand on this, but we use it on a daily basis on like me. And they'll need access to virtual microscopy systems so that we can help visualize specimens. And initially there's going to be a lot of gaps, and we're going to have to keep filling in those gaps with machines as we go, but in the future we'll need to fill less and less of the gaps. And we've already started seeing machines playing a role in medicine. There's been robotic-assisted surgeries, and lately a really exciting one I find is telecommunications. So imagine having to do your rounds from right here this morning and just going on your computer and seeing your nurse and going from room to room, being able to do rounds, interact with the patient, tell the nurse if you wanted to perform a physical examination, and being able to have all the patient's chart information right in front of you. And if need be, you could include a surgeon, a pharmacist, another clinician, a radiologist, all in the same space. And this little robot actually exists today. It's been demonstrated in northern Newfoundland, in a little rural town of approximately 2,000 people, with one nursing station, and the only way to see a physician or go to a hospital is having a plane fly out. And if it's foggy, the plane can't fly because the landing strip is on mountain or large hill. So in the future, we're going to need a variety of disciplines to help build the optimal machine you want. So we're going to need to build trust and relationship with that machine. So taking concepts from psychology, sociology, obviously computer science to engineers. And lastly, ourselves as clinicians or students or future residents and patients to get feedback on how the best thing, because some patients are concerned of losing that face-to-face interaction with their physician. And just a little bit to think about with how you want to design our optimal healthcare system to be able to reach everyone, even in remote areas.
So any questions about this?
Yeah, I was thinking if the questions would be not nicer if Dr. Solez and Mr. Corey and Ms. Backus would be here at the podium and answer questions.
Yeah, we can all come here.
I just find this topic extremely exciting. Two questions, both probably scientific and philosophical.
Yes, and I think you've never been at a pathology conference where anybody read any poetry, and you've heard about, machines will keep us as pets. And so I have a poem about that at the very end. But first, I'd be happy to answer any questions. What about yes, could you get a microphone to him, please? Thank you very much. It's always good to have a skeptic in the audience, right there in the back. Yeah.
Hello, yes. I tend to disagree. I believe that computers are approaching their technological limits. You've got the limit of the static charge circuit.
Right.
Now onto the 686 chip. At least in theory, the 786 chip will not be a substantial improvement on the 686 chip. It's basically if you continue with static charge circuits for computing power. Also, computers can't extrapolate, they can only interpolate, so they can only repeat what they've been exposed to.
Uh-huh.
So
I think this will resonate well in this audience. Pathologists are a relatively conservative group, and they probably like what you just said a lot better than they like what we've been talking about. But what about quantum computing? So, encryption, the best encryption you can imagine. Quantum computing can break. That's not something that human beings will ever be able to do. What about the last phone call you made? It was likely not to a human being, because most normal human beings don't call other human beings very often anymore. You text them or something. So the last phone call you made, you reached an automated attendant somewhere. And so you're basically speaking with a machine. And in the old days, this would be frustrating. You'd come back and complain about it. But whatever that interaction was, likely was smoother, better, faster than anything you've previously anticipated. And you actually got your business done quite quickly. And that's the usual experience with the automated attendant. If you use Facebook and you post large volumes of things there, not everything you attempt to post actually gets there. Because, and this isn't any human being doing it, that Facebook has, algorithms, and they know things that no one in the world ever likes. So if you try to post pictures that fit in that paradigm, no one in the history of the world has ever liked a picture like this, it likely won't become part of, the album that you're creating. So you think that computers don't influence your lives right now, but they actually do, every day. In whatever sector of human endeavor you're engaged in, they are influencing you. They are controlling in minor ways what the appearance of your stuff on Facebook is. And so it's not true that we don't have any limits and they do. I think each has limits of different types, but computing architectures can change. The quantum computer is remarkably different from the traditional computer. So why don't I get these guys to speak?
On this point,
Yeah.
it goes both ways, because if you are saying that we cannot break the quantum encryption, we can just use a Navajo language like it was used during Second War, or Chukch language, which computer never was exposed to, and he will be hopeless.
Yeah. So that is the hope, right? And so that second slide of mine was not a joke, really. It is what everybody is hoping for. As you're all sitting here, you're thinking, yeah, maybe this is true of areas outside of my domain, but within my domain, we'll always need human beings, we'll always need me. It's a very natural thing to feel. But the evidence that whatever you're doing, your hobbies, your profession, will not be replaced by machines, the evidence for that is very slim. If you take the things that you think are least likely to be replaced, let's take psychotherapy, they're already highly effective psychotherapy programs where machines are doing the talking. People would like to tell their deepest, darkest fears to a machine much better than a human being sometimes. So there are many counterintuitive things about the future, what it will be like. If you think that anatomic pathology is protected in some way, that your life today, 5 years from now, will be pretty much like today, just a little bit different, you're absolutely wrong. And you will also be alive in the future to see this, so you can remember today, and by telling you that you're absolutely wrong, that your work life 5, 10 years from now will be pretty much like today. That's absolutely wrong. You'll be able to know whether I'm right or you're right. But I hope you will also help us. Critics, skeptics are quite important to finding the truth. If you have only people who are optimistic, who are supporting you all the time, you'll never discover truth. So that's why I wanted to bring these ideas here and hear from you about them. Do you have other questions? We have 5 minutes more before.
I wish to comment on a computer ability to evaluate histological slides. We are all very enthusiastic about
Yeah.
algorithms, but computers have profound difficulties with even simple tasks like segmenting cells, depending on thickness of slide. If we don't standardize tissue processing, amount of stem which is applied or thickness of the task, they are totally confused. So unless you change whole process, that tissue processing, instead of technologists, placing stuff to cut
Right.
instead of technologists cutting the slides on microton, instead of technologists deciding how long you will keep your slides in the stain and so forth, computers are hopeless, because we did experiments on simple examples of follicular lymphoma where we try to computers how well they will segregate centrocytes from centroblasts, and they failed miserably.
Yes.
It was influenced by such small detail like, was a slide cut by the same tech even on Tuesday versus on Wednesday, and it was
Right.
what we discovered, it was moisture and air which influences how your slide look when you place
Right.
it on a,
But
on a glass slide.
think about something else now. Think about biomarkers in fluid. Because with bioengineered organs like this, encapsulated pancreas, you don't really want to go in and sample cells of a well-functioning, encapsulated pancreas. There's this barrier to keep antibodies from the outside from, damaging the cells. But you can look at the fluid. So there will be situations where today we're looking at tissue, where in the future the science of biomarkers of looking for specific substances in the bathing fluid will really be the way in which those questions are usually answered. And so what you say is true. There are many limits, but for instance, Apereo, that system when they began with cytology, where you have to focus up and down, it looked like there was no computer in the world that could handle that much data, but now I think that's largely solved. So computers are, the clock speed is getting faster, everything, so the barriers of today won't be still there 5, 10 years from now. Do you guys want to say anything? I've been sort of mad that I've sort of been hogging it.
I'd simply make one remark. I believe the presentation I gave today would be a little hollow if I didn't present some of the ideas that I'd like to present. So tomorrow is the day I'll have my presentation on some ideas concerning tissue engineering and pathology. Thank you.